So here we are with part 2 of our Renaissance and Reformation, the beginning of the modern era, question mark. We left off last time talking about the Renaissance, and so the other half of this equation for the change in European society is the Reformation. The Reformation typically is associated with Martin Luther. You probably know a little bit about him if you know a little bit about European history or the history of Christianity. He's around from 1483 to 1546, so he is roughly contemporary with Michelangelo, Copernicus, Leonardo da Vinci, all of the figures we've been talking about already. Some of the things that Luther represents in this time period is that this whole idea of authority. We talked about how in the Renaissance we are questioning authority. We are looking to the past for inspiration. We are looking to the past, sometimes for the first time. And now we're going to look at the past with, now we're moving on to look at, say, the Bible as a voice of authority. One of the things that Luther had going for him is he had a teacher named Erasmus, and Erasmus is a Renaissance scholar. He comes out of the Netherlands. And one of the things that he did is he spent 10 years, Erasmus did, collecting every version of the Bible he could find, the New Testament. And he collected them all, read them all in various languages, primarily Latin and Greek, and then attempted to basically connect all these different versions that he found to come up with a definitive copy of the Bible. So one of Martin Luther's great teachers, Erasmus, a terrific scholar of the Renaissance era, a theological scholar, who tried to very critically look at all the different versions, all the different manuscripts of the Bible that were out there, consolidate them into one definitive edition. So this is the kind of world that Martin Luther is in. He naturally sees the Bible as a great authority. Other things were going on during his time that he found difficulty with. In particular, the list you have here, indulgences. This is the idea of perhaps doing good works or offering donations to the church in order to get some kind of favor in return. Luther found this to be something he couldn't find authority for in the Bible. He couldn't find this connection to the Bible. It had become a custom, a tradition in the Catholic world, and it still continues today in a very different form than in medieval Europe. But in particular, the most grievous element that Luther saw was that at the same time that the Renaissance and the Reformation are going on, we are building St. Peter's Basilica. If any of you have had the opportunity to visit, and you certainly should go, this magnificent building took quite a while to build. This is where Michelangelo did a lot of his work, other artists of the Renaissance as well. And this cost a lot of money. And so indulgences were being sold in order to finance the cost of that building. And Luther took great umbrage with this. Other issues, simony. Simony is the idea of actually selling bishoprics, selling priestly positions. Oftentimes, a bishopric in medieval Europe came with a lot of land, and you collected tithes and taxes from people to support the cathedral there, to support the church. And sometimes these bishoprics could be quite lucrative. They were certainly powerful positions, and at times, we understand, local princes and sometimes even the church would appoint bishops based on their ability to give back, if you will, to the church. Luther questioned celibacy of priests. He said, yes, there is that tradition. It goes back to Paul, but he could not find any authority for it in the Bible. The concept of purgatory. Some of you may know this idea of a time or a place after death where one's sins are washed away over a certain amount of penance, if you will. Luther did not like this as well. He also challenged certain of the sacraments. So Luther, part of this Renaissance and Reformation, he's getting a look at the ancient texts. He's doing a critical study of them through this consolidated Bible. And he's also looking around at the world around him, and he's being very critical of that too. So you can see that connection to Renaissance thinking, the same kind of thinking that gets us the scientific revolution. Luther is a part of that. This map is just to show you the places associated with Luther. Wittenberg, you see here with this nice big red star is where he went to university, and he wrote up 95, Luther did, 95 different theses, he said, the 95 theses, 95 points to be discussed, to be debated. And tradition maintains he nailed them on the wall at the Cathedral of Wittenberg and challenged any priest or bishop to come out and debate him. Perhaps. There's a lot of drama associated with that. And one of the things I think is important to point out as well with this map is that you see that the German lands are quite extensive. They're not really controlled by one king. There's a lot of different groups here, so it's not a consolidated area. So there's no one sort of political leader who has absolute control over this area. Local political leaders have a lot of power. Many of these local political leaders liked the idea that Luther challenged traditional authority because they didn't like well, in particular, the Holy Roman Emperor coming in and saying, I'm in charge of you. So there was a political tendency as well to find Luther's ideas attractive. If you can challenge the Holy Roman Emperor, who was anointed by the Pope at Rome, so if you could challenge the Pope, if you could challenge the Holy Roman Emperor, then maybe local princes, say, in Frankfurt or Würzburg, Bamberg, Nuremberg, could sort of declare their independence of traditional authority as well. We think that Luther's ideas aimed at reforming the church, but later on it just went too far, and we have a break. The Protestant church quickly fragmented after that because there was no central authority in the Protestant church. And so you get the Lutheran church, the Reformed church, Calvin and his ideas, Presbyterian church, Anglican church in England, the forerunners of the Mennonites. We have the Mennonites are active here in Kansas and the Wichita area. So you get a lot of different groups immediately emerging. I just wanted to run through a few things here that show the response by the church to the Reformation. And in the 1500s, the church calls a big council, and this council will go on for years. And in this council, the church will more clearly define its understanding of Christianity, but also respond to some of the charges that Luther has levied at their door. In particular, though, they will reconcile this idea of the relationship of faith and works in salvation, but that will become clearly defined. It had always been part of the tradition of the church, but here it becomes defined. The church's interpretation of the Bible will be the ultimate and final interpretation. Any Christian who substitutes his or her own interpretation was verging on the heretical, was somehow outside the norm. So we've got a printing press, we've got Bibles, we've got lots of different versions of the Bible. And when the printing press comes along, we actually publish that Bible in German, a language that most people in Germany speak and perhaps can't even read. So instead of Latin, it's in German. So we're fighting the idea that people might interpret the Bible in a slipshod way, right? That they might do it in a quick and fast and loose fashion to suit some other purposes other than theological. The church also ended the sale of indulgences. It ended pluralism, which meant that one priest might be in charge of more than one parish, or one bishop in particular might be in charge of more than one cathedral. And they try to put an end to absenteeism. In other words, if you're the priest of a local parish and you just want to take a vacation and you want to be gone for a couple of months, the church puts an end to that. Despite the efforts of the church and the efforts of Luther, Christendom will no longer be united in Europe. We saw in the early Middle Ages from about 500 to 1000 that all of Europe was united in Catholicism. That's going to end. And from this map you can see all the different shades and colors, right, that indicate all the different sorts of approaches to Christianity and Islam. So Europe no longer united under one religion. Unfortunately, for European society, this is going to lead to some warfare. Now, it's called religious warfare. It's ultimately political warfare because it's kings and princes rebelling against the Holy Roman Empire. It's the Anglican English against the Catholic French. And most of the time, what we're looking at are territorial events, territorial warfare, imperial issues where European countries are moving out into the New World and fighting each other there. But we're going to fight each other also under the banner of religion. There's a 30 Years' War. This happens in the 17th century from 1618 to 1648. Devastated much of Germany. Between 25 and 40% of the population are going to die due to warfare. It's going to pit the Catholic Habsburgs. This is a family in Spain, Italy, Austria. It's going to pit the Catholic Habsburgs against various princes of Germany. Oftentimes, those princes are going to be aided by Denmark, Sweden, and sometimes even France, because the French don't like the Spanish. And so even though the French and the Spanish are predominantly Catholic, the French will find a way to support the Protestants when it suits their political aims, right? So a lot of religious warfare. So the Reformation, the Renaissance as well, the Renaissance and the Reformation, we talked today about disruption. These are disruptive events to the status quo in Europe. Will they be positive or negative in the long run? In 1648, we have an end to this religious warfare. We have something called the Peace of Westphalia. And in this particular peace, we're going to hear that each prince in the German lands would have the right to determine the religion of his own state, choosing Roman Catholicism, Lutheranism, or Calvinism in the process. These wound up being the dominant faiths of the time. It's this principle of cuius regio, eius religio. So whoever rules, his religion. This isn't exactly spiritual. This is political, right? Christians living in principalities where their denomination was not the established church were guaranteed the right to practice their faith. So if you're Catholic and you're living in a Lutheran state, you can still practice your faith, but just know that the official religion of your state will not be the one that you practice. The other interesting thing about the Peace of Westphalia is that it ended the Pope's pan-European political power. The earlier popes, when all of Europe was united under one Christian faith, often entertained the ideas of a united country of Europe, right, under one faith. And the popes took great leadership roles, not only in religion, but also in social issues, ethical issues, and yes, political issues as well, legal issues. And this treaty of Westphalia, essentially negated the Pope's influence. Pope Innocent X was very upset with the course of events that happened here, and rightly so, in that he was basically, the papacy was pushed out of any discussion. Declared the treaty null, void, invalid, iniquitous, unjust, damnable, reprobate, inane, empty of meaning, and effect for all times. Wow. So again, this image of the religious division in Europe, the Renaissance, the Reformation, is going to bring extraordinary change to all of Europe, introduce extraordinary challenges to the status quo. Also, as we've said before, perhaps opening up the beginning to what we would call the modern era. Our next video will be on the scientific revolution, so I would ask you to consider, if the backdrop to the scientific revolution is the Renaissance and the Reformation, what impact do you suppose those concepts of Renaissance and Reformation had upon people pursuing science, and then what impact, vice versa, might the scientific revolution have on the Renaissance and the Reformation?